What's the keys to building confidence so that you're attracting
Well,
what you want?
Look, I read some of your biographical history before we talked today, and you tell a story about being picked last.
Mm-hmm.
And then you compensated for that.
Yes.
Now, Alfred Adler, by the way, the psychoanalyst, the associate of Freud, built his whole theory around compensation of that sort. Inferiority complex plus compensation. But it's adaptive, right? Like, you got picked last, it embarrassed the hell out of you.
Yep.
So what did you do? You decided that is not going to be me
Never
anymore.
again.
Right.
Never again.
Okay,
Yes.
now you did say, that you adopted a maybe too, inflexible model of what it meant to be masculine as a consequence. But when I read that, I thought, yeah, but still, fair enough. It wasn't, the new you that you adopted wasn't optimal in all possible manners, but it was definitely improvement over the previous you.
Exactly. I wasn't picked last again, that's for sure.
Right. Well, exactly. Okay. So the first thing I would say is that if you feel insecure and less and ashamed and all of that you have to take stock. And look, I have an exercise online at selfauthoring.com. There's 3 exercises there. One helps you write about the past, one about the present, and one about the future. The present authoring program helps you assess your faults and your virtues. Okay, well, if you have some faults and you feel insecure and inferior because of that, well, you should. Now, it shouldn't be so much that you're crippled by it and unable to take action. You shouldn't be beating yourself into the ground because you're not everything you could be, because no one is. And if you beat yourself into the ground, then you can't get up and improve. But you have to differentiate. It's like, okay, to what degree am I being hard on myself, counterproductively critical, hearing the voice of my too harsh and angry father in my head,
Right.
Adopting inappropriate stereotypical representations of masculine competence? How much of my self-criticism is ill-advised? Fair enough. And you want to deal with yourself with a certain amount of care. But then along with that, there's fix your weaknesses. If you're ashamed of being ignorant, you're showing up at a party because, you claim to knowledge that you don't have and someone exposes you. Well, you can be angry at them, and you probably will, but they've actually done you a favor. They pointed out an inadequacy is a pathway that you can travel down, right? A recognized inadequacy is, it's such a gift in some sense, if it's accurate. I'm in it, because you think, well, what should I do? What should I do with my life? That's a real complicated question. Oh, here's an inadequacy. Excellent, you have a goal now, rectify it. Now, you still have to think strategically and figure out how to rectify it and do it step by step. But Carl Rogers, the psychotherapist, pointed out that the person, for therapy to be successful, the person has to want to change. So they have to have recognized that they have a problem. If someone is mandated by the court to attend therapy, it's very difficult for the therapist to convince them that they have a problem. Once you're convinced you have a problem, it's like, away you go. I know it's still technically difficult. It requires discipline and all of that. There's no magic solution. But if you're plagued by feelings of inferiority, you should rectify the most obvious inferiorities. I would say that you have to rectify an inadequacy when it's clearly an impediment to your goal. Or you have to shift goals. But if you're shifting goals because of an inadequacy related impediment, then you have to ask yourself, is your desire to shift the goal reliable, or are you just taking the easy way out?
Right.
You can protect yourself by picking a different goal that's more difficult. That's a good mental hygiene practice, because sometimes you should switch goals rather than rectifying inadequacies. But you can fool yourself then, and that's not good.
And if someone is goalless, lazy, unmotivated, not sure what they want to do, what would be a few key steps to get started to turn their life around, or to find the motivation for something greater than where they're at?
Well, I think a fair bit of that's probably to be found in, you can find it in shame, you can find it in guilt, you can find it in conscience, you can find it in anger, you can find it in interest. and engagement and beauty. There's lots of pathways. If you're angry about something in the world, well, you know, that's an indication that that's in some sense your problem, right? It's speaking to you in a moral sense. This shouldn't be that way. Well, maybe you're the person who should do something about it in some manner. Maybe it'll take your whole life to figure out how to do that. But it's bothering you for a reason. So the negative emotions can be a pathway to transformation. I'm not trying to romanticize them. They can crush you completely and leave you with nothing, right? For sure. And they can go badly astray. But shame, that's a good one. What am I ashamed of? Well, can you fix any of that? I'm going to work on these things that I'm ashamed of. And just see, like, does my life improve enough so that I'm not so bitter about it now, or I'm not so hopeless about it now? And my experience has generally been that works. It works. And then some of it's practical knowledge too. It's like you can get a really long way with very small changes, incremental changes, micro habit changes. So aim low.
Don't have big goals or big transformations.
Well, you can, but the problem with a big goal is that it's daunting enough so that it might paralyze you, and there's a high probability of failure. And so imagine that you're your own child. Okay, now imagine you love this child and you would like him, we'll say him because it's you and I talking, to succeed. Now you have an ideal for this child. You would like him to grow up to be the best he can be, better than you, the best man he can be. That's what you want for your son. If the good part of you is talking, you definitely want him to be better than you are, but you want him to be the best he could be if your vision is unclouded. Okay, but then you offer him a goal. It's like, well, do this. Well, can he do it? Well, if he can do it without a second's thought, there's no challenge in it. There's no developmental impetus. It's not in the zone of proximal development. You want a goal that you can do, but that requires some improvement on your part. Because you want to attain the goal, that's satisfying, but then you want to make yourself into the thing that can attain goals. And so you want to push yourself. You want to push yourself a bit far. Yes. And there's an ample psychological literature that suggests that that's where maximal motivation is to be found.
Interesting.
So you're pursuing a goal, but you're also pursuing the goal of transforming yourself at the same time. You're doing both of those at the same time.
Do you need to know that you're transforming yourself in order to attain the goal? Or do most people just think, I got to take these steps to make it happen, but they don't realize they're becoming better human beings?
It depends on what you mean by realize. They have the sense of satisfaction and confidence that would indicate that, although they might not be able to make what that means explicit. But I would say it would be better to make it explicit. It adds one other dimension of possible motivation. I still believe that, you know, genuine accomplishment, but it's ethical, it's always ethical accomplishment. I believe that to be the case. Genuine ethical accomplishment is the best source of security, but it's not unerring.
When you mean ethical accomplishment, do you mean
doing something good, right?
Whether people know about it or not, just good and right for yourself. Is that what I'm hearing you say? Or does someone else need to acknowledge that this was good and right?
I think if you've done it for yourself, that's good. But if you do it and other people are in on it and along for the ride, that's also good. And sometimes that's better to bring people along. If it's just a matter of them acknowledging it, well, there's value in that too. I mean, you know, people say, well, you shouldn't care what people think of you. It's like, well, yeah, of course you should. Psychopaths don't care what people think of them. Now, you shouldn't care so much what people think about you that you're willing to lie to maintain whatever it is that you think they value. Like, there are places beyond which that becomes counterproductive, clearly.
There's this old story in King Arthur where the knights go off to look for the Holy Grail, which is either the cup that Christ drank out of it the Last Supper, or the cup into which the blood that gushed from his side was poured when he was crucified. The stories vary, but it's basically a holy object, like the phoenix in some sense, that's a representation of transformation. So it's an ideal. And so King Arthur's knights, who sit at a round table because they're all roughly equal, go off to find the most valuable thing. And where do you look for the most valuable thing when you don't know where it is? Well, each of the knights looks at the forest surrounding the castle and enters the forest at the point that looks darkest to him. And that's a good thing to understand, because the gateway to wisdom and the gateway to the development of personality, which is exactly the same thing, is precisely through the portal that you do not want to climb through. And the reason for that's actually quite technical. This is a Jungian presupposition too, is that, well, there's a bunch of things about you that are underdeveloped, and a lot of those things are because there's things you've avoided looking at because you don't want to look at them, and there's parts of you you've avoided developing because it's hard for you to develop those parts. And so it's by virtual necessity that what you need is where you don't want to look, because that's where you've kept it. And that's why there's, you know, an idiosyncratic element of it for everyone. Your particular place of enlightenment and terror is not going to be the same as yours, except that they're both places of enlightenment and terror. So they're equivalent at one level of analysis and different at another. So anyways, back to fiction and what it does. It distills truth, and it produces characters that are composites. And the more they become composites, the more they approximate a mythological character. And so they become more and more universally true and more approximating religious deities. But the problem with that is they become more and more distant from individual experience. And so with literature, there's this very tight line where you need to make the character more than merely human, but not so much of a god that, you know, one of the things that happened to Superman in the 1980s, Superman started out, he's got a heavenly set of parents, by the way, and an earthly set of parents, and he's an orphan like Harry Potter. Very common theme is that when Superman first emerged, he could only jump over buildings, you know, and maybe he could stop a locomotive. But by the time the 1980s rolled around, like, he could juggle planets and, you know, swallow hydrogen bombs, and, you know, he could do anything. Well, people stopped buying the Superman comics because how interesting is that? It's like something horrible happens and Superman deals with it. And something else horrible happens and Superman deals with it. And it's like, that's dull. He turned into such an archetype. He was basically the omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent God, and that's no fun. It's like God wins, and then God wins again, and then again God wins, and, you know. So then they had to weaken him in different ways with kryptonite, you know. So green kryptonite kind of made him sick, and red kryptonite, I think, kind of mutated him, if I remember correctly. And anyways, they had to introduce flaws into his character so that there could be some damn plot. And that's something to think about, you know. There's a deep existential lesson in that your being is limited and flawed and fragile. You're like the genie, which is genius in the little tiny lamp, you know, this immense potential, but constrained in this tiny little living space, as Robin Williams said when he played the genie in Aladdin. But the fact that you have limitations means that the plot of your life is the overcoming of those limitations, and that if you didn't have limitations, well, there wouldn't be a plot, and maybe there would be no life. And so that's part of the reason why perhaps you have to accept the fact that you're flawed and insufficient, and live with it and consider it a precondition for being. It's at least a reasonable idea. So anyways, one of the main characters is the country, the known, the explored territory. We went over that a bit, and it always has two elements. I mean, your country is your greatest friend and your worst enemy, you know, because it squashes you into conformity and demands that you act in a certain manner, and reduces your individuality to that element that's tolerated by everyone else, and it constrains your potential in a single direction. And so it's really tyrannical, but at the same time It provides you with a place to be and all of the benefits that have accrued as a result of the actions of your ancestors and all the other people that you're associated with. So there's the good tyrant or the bad tyrant and the good king, and those are archetypal figures, and that's because they're always true, and they're always true simultaneously, you know, which is partly why I object to the notion of the patriarchy, because it's a it's the what do you call that? It's the apprehension of a mythological trope, which is that of the evil tyrant, without any appreciation for the fact that the archetype actually has two parts, and the other part is the wise king. And you know, you can tell an evil tyrant story about culture, no problem, but it's one-sided, and that's very dangerous, because you don't want to forget all the good things that you have while you're criticizing all the ways that things are in error. That's a lack of gratitude, and it's a lack of wisdom, and it's founded in resentment, and it's very dangerous, both personally and socially. I told you that Captain Hook is a tyrant because he's got this crocodile chasing him, and the crocodile has a clock in its stomach, and that's death. It's like, obviously, right? Tick, 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 tick. And it's a crocodile, and it's under the water, and it's already got a taste of him, so he's being chased around by death, and that makes him terrified and resentful and cruel and bitter, and so he's a tyrant. And he wants to wreak havoc everywhere. And then Peter Pan, of course, looks at Captain Hook and thinks, why the hell should I grow up and to be a tyrant and sacrifice all the potential of childhood? And the answer to that is, the potential sacrifices itself if you don't utilize it as you mature, and you just end up a 40-year-old lost boy, which is a horrifying thing to behold. It's almost as if you're the corpse of a child, the living corpse of a child, because who the hell wants a 6-year-old, 40-year-old? You're a little on the stale side by that point, and not the world's happiest individual. So, you know, your potential is going to disappear because you age anyways, and so you might as well shape that potential in a particular direction and at least become something, no matter how limited, rather than nothing. So, you know, Peter Pan, that's a great story. It's a great mythological story. So, well, so let's talk about tyrants. Well, not only are they mythological figures, but they exist, and they tend to be deified. I mean, Stalin was, for all intents and purposes, God the Father in Soviet Russia, although he was pretty much only the worst elements of Old Testament God, who was, you know, constantly smiting people and wiping out populations and doing all sorts of things that seemed to be quite nasty. But nonetheless, you know, people worshipped him in many ways, and he's a representation of just exactly what goes wrong when things really go wrong, when people stop paying attention and when they all lie. Because one of the things that characterized the communist state was that no one ever got to say anything they actually believed, ever. And that was partly because 1 out of 3 people was an informer, which meant if you had a family of 6 people, 2 of them were informing on the government about you, and that included your own children. And if you were an informer, you were often amply rewarded by the state, so that if you lived in an overcrowded apartment building with 3 families in the same flat, and you informed on, you know, the woman down the hall that you didn't like, she got shipped off to the old concentration camp, and you got her apartment. And so that was a lovely society, and it only killed about 30 million people between 1919 and 1959. So that's what happens when the archetypal structure gets tilted badly, when people forget that they have a responsibility to fulfill as citizens, as awake citizens who are capable of stating the truth, and the archetype shifts, so there's nothing left of the great father except the tyrant. And let's not have that happen. I mean, the one on the right is really interesting, because consciously or unconsciously, you know, there's Stalin surrounded by what is, for all intents and purposes, fire. You know, he looks like Maleficent in Sleeping Beauty when she shows up at Aurora's christening. You know, she puts her arms up in the air and green fire surrounds her. It's like, It's like he's surrounded by fire, and there's Lenin above him, who's like king of the fiery realm, and that's for sure. So I mean, all the terrors that happened in the Soviet Union didn't start under Stalin, they started under Lenin, and Stalin was definitely Lenin's legitimate son, let's put it that way.
There's a book. It's a book called About Face. It's about a guy that was in the Korean War and then he was in the Vietnam War, and his name is Colonel David Hackworth. When I was on deployment, I would open up that book anywhere, and I would read 2 pages or 3 pages before I'd go to bed if I was in my bed that night. And there were so many lessons that correlated to what I was actually going through. And a real obvious example was, when you read, you can learn, and you don't have to go through the school of hard knocks. You don't have to get punched in the face repeatedly with things that turn out to be situations that other people have absolutely gone through. The level of capability increases so much by seeing something one single time. Well, if I see something one time, I'm infinitely better than if I'd never seen it before. It's like those little puzzles. They give you a little puzzle, some kind of a mind bender, right? The mind benders only work on you one time. The riddle only works on you one time. Then you go, I know the answer to that. That's the answer. You never get fooled by that again. So just seeing it one time, you're infinitely better. So when you read enough, you're capturing all these lessons.
Of course, you want to put the book on. You want to become that person. That can rattle you up, man. Especially if the person is thinking all sorts of things that you've never thought. I mean, I love reading for that reason. I could pick my peers too, which I really loved. It's like, well, I have these people around me, but then there's these people who've lived before me and in different places, and I can set them up on my shelf. I can enter into their world, and I can benefit from everything they've thought and saturate myself with that person. It's very disruptive, especially if the person that you're reading has a mind that's more powerful and more well-developed than your own. It was very disruptive, but unbelievably useful to try on other people like that. And you get the benefit of their entire life distilled into their book. It's 30 years of work. I read this one book called The Neuropsychology of Anxiety, which it's a great scientific work. It's a very hard book. I think it has 1,800 references, something like that. And this guy, Jeffrey Gray, he actually read all those references and he understood them. And so it took me 6 months to read the book, but I got an entire education out of it. I got to experience in 6 months what it took him 30 years to learn. Like, what a gift that is. It's unbelievable. What were you reading when you were in university? Was it fiction, novels? Was it nonfiction? What were you focusing on?
As trite as this may sound, it was actually the most impact was from Shakespeare. It was the most impact on multiple levels. And I'll tell you the primary level. And when I've covered Shakespeare on my podcast, I explain this to people. People think, well, I didn't really understand. I read it, I didn't understand it. If you think you're going to just pick up Shakespeare, open it up and read it and understand it, you're not going to, because it's barely written in English. It's barely written in English. It's almost another language. So what you have to do is you have to start to interpret it. And so what I realized with Shakespeare is, number one, the weight of the words, that these words were so pregnant with meaning that you had to pull those words and parse those words and pull those words apart to see all the depth that each individual word had, and then the way that they're put together. And what was great about this was, by the time I was back, because then I went right back into the SEAL teams, and somebody would hand me a rules of engagement document that was written by some lawyer in Washington, D.C., and I'd pull it out and say, wait a second, this word, I don't know what this word means. So let's pull this word out. Let's see what this actual definition of this particular word is, and how that changes my viewpoint of these rules of engagement, and how can I translate that for my troops so that they actually know what to do. So that part, for me, was from a reading perspective, starting to read Shakespeare and saying, oh, okay, you're not going to understand this. And if you don't understand something, that's okay. You pull out the Oxford English Dictionary and you look it up. And then you not just find out what the meaning of the word is, but what's the root word and where does it come from and what kind of depth and what kind of...
Yeah, and that's really, that's unbelievably useful too. Virtually every word is like that, because a word is an ancient artifact. It's like an animal in some sense. It has an evolutionary history and it transforms across time. And each word it carries the echoes of its past with it too, because each word attracts other words in a particular unique way. So it kind of lives in a word ecosystem as well. And the ecosystem contains information about the history of that word. And you think, well, why is that important? It's like, well, hey, guess what? You think in words, you talk in words. You have all these archaic entities, these words, these living entities that you use. It's like the more you know about them, the more you know about you, the more you know about other people, and the better you are at formulating and communicating your ideas. There's nothing lost in that kind of investigation. There's nothing but gain there.
If you can communicate in those means, speaking, writing, and if you can think, you are so powerful that nothing can stop you. You think about it, well, what do you mean? Well, I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're a plumber or a waitress. Not that there's anything wrong with being a plumber or a waitress, because there isn't. It's like, you're going to negotiate for a raise, you're going to negotiate for a promotion, you're going to negotiate how your customers treat you, you're going to negotiate how you advertise yourself, for example, with regards to picking up customers. That's all articulated linguistic ability, the ability to express yourself. If you're good at that, you win, period. And so, right, look, there's a reason, like the children of rich people took liberal arts degrees. Why? Because the rich knew that that was the best possible training for leadership positions. And it wasn't because it was a romp through the park for 4 years and then daddy's inheritance. It was because if you learned how to communicate, you were unstoppable. You can accomplish what you want to accomplish if you're being wise about it by being eminently reasonable. That's the thing, is you can have reason on your side, and I mean reason in the best possible sense. It's like you don't have to be temperamental and impulsive in this sort of situation. You can try to put yourself together, which I would highly recommend, and then you can lay yourself open to the attacks. Now, that means you should be able to defend yourself. You should have the articulated structures at hand. You should orient yourself properly, politically and philosophically, and even physically for that matter, so that you're a force to contend with. But once you have that down, then you play it with the lightest possible hand. And that way also you have the highest probability of let's say, of changing the minds of people who are possessed by an ideology so that they can rejoin the productive political dialogue. And that's what you want. You don't want to defeat them. First of all, good luck with that. It's like, well, you've got to live with them. You can't defeat people that you live with, because there they are the next day. And if you defeat them, well, then they're defeated. And maybe that's not for the best. And second, it's not like they're happy about the fact that they're defeated. It's not like they're not going to be waiting around to find out when they can defeat you next. It's like if you're married to someone, think, well, I won that argument. It's like, no, you didn't. No, you didn't, because there that person is, waking up next to you the next day. And so if you won, you know, and they're defeated and humiliated because of it, then the probability that they're going to react properly to you, if they have any sense at all, is very low. And so what you want is you want to negotiate your way to a sustainable peace. And that's what you want to do in the political realm too, because, well, in this country, you know, there's a certain amount of polarization. I don't think it's anywhere near as bad as the media is making it out to be, as they go through their death spirals and generate clickbait like mad. Because, you know, in the US, you guys have been voting 50% Republican and 50% Democrat for what, about 20 years, right down the middle. It hasn't changed that much. But these people who are on the opposite side of the political spectrum from you, they're the people who live across the street. They're the people who live down the street. They're family members, for that matter. And you're going to have to live with them. It's like, you don't want to defeat them. You want to bring them back into the reasonable political dialogue. And you do that by having a certain amount, first of all, by getting your act together so that you're a credible and admirable person, but then by having some forbearance and negotiating towards peace.
If you're resentful about something, well, first of all, you should notice, I'm resentful. And that's kind of humiliating because no one's proud of being resentful. It's a shameful emotion. Well, so then why are you resentful? Well, there's only two reasons as far as I've been able to tell. One is that you're allowing yourself to be taken advantage of, or you're being taken advantage of. Sometimes you're not allowing yourself. Sometimes you're a child being abused by their uncle. You're not allowing yourself. You can't do anything about it. You're resentful because you're being taken advantage of, or because you're immature. It's one of those two things. Figure out which it is, and then take the steps necessary to address it. Living a life without resentment is a great goal. People are often resentful if they see that responsibility has been abdicated. Why isn't that person doing their job? It's like, well, hey man, step in at your workplace, in your family. You know, and you think, well, I shouldn't have to do that extra work. Well, you shouldn't be a slave. You shouldn't allow yourself to be tyrannized. But if something bugs you because a responsibility is going unfulfilled, there's a great opportunity for you. And this is something I don't think we teach young people well. And one of the things, you may remember this, that was so striking about the tour was that I made a case fairly consistently that most people find the meaning that sustains them through the vicissitudes of life, not in happiness, but in responsibility. And that would bring everyone to a halt. It would always make the whole theater silent. It's like, oh, I never thought of that connection. Because maybe you want to avoid responsibility, and you can understand why. You can understand why. You hide from it. That is what you encounter if you go out in the world. You think, who the hell wants that? I don't want the responsibility. It's like, well, yes, you do, as it turns out. There's nothing better than responsibility. Now, you know, I say that with some caution. I think that it's hard to say. The responsibility, I've been overwhelmed by my apparent responsibility, but I think it's also kept me alive. And I mean that literally. And so,
wait, can you go a little deeper with that? I mean, when you were at your darkest moments in the last 2 years, whatever that might be, was it the feeling
well,
of
there's been
the
many times in the last year where it would have been much easier for me just to be dead. That's constant. So, but no.
But is it but no because of something in you, or is it but no because of the people that you would have abdicated that responsibility of the people, or is that ultimately the same
That's
thing?
it.
Yeah.
Well, I do think the two aren't easily distinguishable, but it's definitely that. It's definitely that. You know. And it's one of the chapters, the last chapter, is be grateful in spite of your suffering. You know, you need a meaning to sustain you through suffering. And it is the case that you find that in responsibility. Well, and so it's good advice for anyone who's at work. You're resentful about this and that because people aren't pulling their weight. Pull it. See what happens. You become indispensable instantly. You'll know everything. And maybe that job won't be for you, or maybe that relationship won't be for you, but you'll take your hard acquired wisdom and go elsewhere and flourish there. So, you know, this kid stopped me. I think I wrote about this in this book. Kid stopped me in a restaurant one day when I was walking in, and he said, and he had an undergraduate degree, and he was working as a waiter in a chain steak place. And he stopped me and he said, you know, about 6 months ago, I was watching one of your lectures and I decided to stop being resentful about my job. And he was resentful because he had a university degree and he's working as a waiter. You know, and look, I don't have anything against waiters. It's like a waiter can make your evening, you know, hooray. He said, well, I decided I'd start trying at my job, like really trying as if it was worthwhile. He said he got 3 promotions in 6 months, like he's just rocketing up the power hierarchy. Well, it's not power, it's competence if it's well run. You know, and places are full of opportunity. There's always people out there who are doing far better than you on pretty much anything you want to imagine. And if all you're doing is seeing yourself in their reflected light, let's say, then it's going to be pretty damn dismal. But it's not a good comparison because, well, first of all, there's danger in just comparing yourself to others, period, because they're not you. And God only knows what struggles they had to undertake to get to where they were, or what burdens they're currently carrying that you're not aware of. But you can certainly contrast yourself with yourself. And that's a lot better. It is the only way. Well, it's also the only way of really of really measuring anything approximating proper improvement. You can actually tell when you're a little better than you were yesterday.
Right.
And you can actually do that. That's another thing that's so interesting about it, is that you can actually make yourself a little better in some way, pretty much. Well, I don't know if it's at every moment, but you can certainly do it every day. Let's say you want to become who you could be in the fullest sense. So let's say you're someone who's going to solve some serious problems. Okay, the first thing you have to do is admit to the seriousness of the problems. That's no joke. And so the first thing is just the terror of the problem itself. And that's enough to paralyze you. And that's the Hydra, that's the Gorgon with the head of snakes. It'll paralyze and turn you to stone. That's the basilisk in the Harry Potter series. You look at it and it turns you to stone and lurks underneath everything, right? And it's malevolence and tragedy. And so there's that. And then the next is, well, you're going to take responsibility for that? You're really going to do that, are you? That's a hell of a load, man. And so it's daunting to even consider that. And then there's the discipline and responsibility that necessitates, which is also daunting. It's like, oh my God, the problem's that serious. I'm really going to have to get my act together in order to not contribute to it, much less solve it. And so the problem is terrible. And then the solution is daunting. But the upside of that is like, well, there isn't anything better to have than a problem that's worth solving, like that's really worth solving. Right. And so the more of that you take on, the more you have a reason to get out of bed in the morning, no matter what. Like, I'm getting up, I'm trudging forward. Doesn't matter what I'm suffering from. I've got things that need to be done. They're necessary. And that gives you that sense of purpose that is the antidote to bitterness. Okay, well, let's say you want your life to be meaningful. It's like, okay, then what you do matters. It actually matters. Or how starting to clean up the room changed their life. That's quite fun because it's something I always tell people to do instead of going out and protesting. Jesus, I just can't stand
Cleaning up
that.
the room?
Yeah.
Meaning?
Well, my sense is that if you want to change the world, you start from yourself and work outward because you build your competence that way. It's like, I don't know how you can go out and protest the structure of the entire economic system if you can't keep your room organized. Well, I made a video call, which was called Message to Millennials, where it was called How to Change the World Properly. A bit of it on the pretentious side, I suppose, but I was trying to produce something that was a counterposition to this idea that what you should do is go out and fix up other people. You know, that's just not right. There's a New Testament line about that, something about, you know, not worrying too much about the log in your neighbor's eye, or about the speck in your neighbor's eye when you have a log in your eye. What would the world be like if people stopped avoiding the things they knew they should do? You know, because the question is, how much are we contributing to the fact that life is an existential catastrophe and a tragedy? How much is our own corruption contributing to that? That's a really worthwhile question. The things you leave undone because you're angry, you're resentful, you're lazy, you have inertia. Well, you consult your conscience and it says, well, you know, that place over there could use a little work. It's the same as working on yourself, and so you clean that up because you can. And then things are a little clearer around you. And you're a little better off because you've practiced a bit. And so you're a little stronger. And then something else manifests itself and says, well, maybe you could like take a crack at fixing me up too. So you decide to do that. And then that gets a little bit more pristine, you know, and soon, and it's humble because you're not exceeding your domain of competence. You know, it's like, don't be fixing up the economy, 18-year-olds. You don't know anything about the economy. It's a massive, complex machine beyond anyone's understanding, and you mess with it at your peril. So, and can you even clean up your own room? No. Well, you should think about that. You should think about that. It's known from multiple dimensions simultaneously that the system that produces happiness, let's say in the founder's sense, produces that emotion in relationship to the observation of movement towards a valued goal. And so you can derive some conclusions from that. The first is that without a goal, there's no happiness by definition, because happiness marks movement towards a valued goal. The next is, well, the higher the goal, the more value there is in the observation of movement towards it. And so out of that, you might ask, well, then what's the highest goal? Because why don't we go for that? Well, then you could say, well, you should do your best for the best. You might say, well, that's just to make me hedonically happy. It's like, well, wait a second, you know, cocaine will work for that, because it actually even activates this system. But what about tomorrow and next week and next month? And so the problem with hedonism as a goal is, first of all, it vanishes when you're suffering. But even failing that, if you're serving yourself hedonically in the narrow sense, it's just about me and my pleasure. It's like, okay, which you? Today's you, tomorrow's you, next week's you, next month's you. What about next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? You're going to lead a hedonic and dissolute life, and what are you going to be, a burnt-out shell and a wreck, a dismal wreck in 10 years? Because that's what'll happen. And so if you don't construe yourself as a community stretched out across time, then you're not even serving yourself. And if you do construe yourself as a community stretched across time, then serving other people and serving yourself turn out to be exactly the same thing. I just did a course on the Sermon on the Mount, and Christ, in one of the sections of that sermon, he says to people that you shouldn't lose your saltiness, you shouldn't lose your savor, and you're the salt of the earth, and without that salt, everything loses its flavor. And salt is a preservative, and it's a spice, and that's often conceptualized, that phrase, as referring to the salt of the earth, you know, the solid, reliable types who bear all burdens. But that is not what it means. I looked at a lot of different translations. I talked to a lot of people about that verse, and really what it means is, well, there should be some spiciness and unpredictability and humor about you. And there should be some play in the system, right? Because that's what stops you from just being the narrow, dead, past letter of the law with no spirit. There should be some snake inside the tree, right? There should be some fire inside the bush. Those are all ways of construing that are symbolically equivalent. There should be some dynamism in you, and a fair bit of that's associated with, well, enthusiasm. That's fun, but enthusiasm means to be imbued with the Spirit of God. That's why people like comedians so much too, because that's what they do. And so you have to leaven the duty with humor, and your book does a lovely job of that too, because your book, which is a very conservative book in the best possible way, and is a call to duty and responsibility, but you constantly return to themes of both stoicism and humor, which are tied together in some sense. You know, I was just in Newfoundland for the last week doing a documentary there, and Newfoundland's a rough rock, and it's beautiful and harsh, and the people there are tough and resilient, man, because they had to be. And Newfies have a great sense of humor, and they're always making fun, and that's a necessary leaven, right? That ability to deal with serious matters with a light touch, and it's something I'm trying to learn to do more and more, even in the most serious of conversations, you know, too. Because if you're a master, you've got both. You've got that light touch and that sense of humor. You really see that in military people who've been through rough situations. It doesn't matter what your personal circumstances are. There's always something that isn't right near you, isn't correct, isn't laid out properly, that you could just fix if you wanted to. There's no shortage of opportunities to do that. You can do that in your own mind. You can do that in your own room. You can do that in your own household, in your local community. And maybe if you get good at doing it at all those levels, then you can start to look beyond that. If you adopt an attitude that the role that you should play is to make things better wherever you are, however you can, that what would actually happen would be that things would get better wherever you are. The world shifts itself around your aim, because you're a creature that has an aim. You have to have an aim in order to do something. You're an aiming creature. You look at a point and you move towards it. It's built right into you. So that sets up the world around you. It organizes all of your perceptions. It organizes what you see and you don't see. It organizes your emotions and your motivations. So you organize yourself around that aim. And then what happens is the day manifests itself as a set of challenges and problems. And if you solve them properly, then you stay on the pathway towards that aim. and you can concentrate on the day. And so that way you get to have your cake and eat it too, because you can point into the distance, the far distance, and you can live in the day. And it seems to me that that makes every moment of the day supercharged with meaning, because if everything that you're doing every day is related to the highest possible aim that you can conceptualize, well, that's the very definition of the meaning that would sustain you in your life. An uphill trajectory is actually even better than being somewhere good, as far as I'm concerned, because one of the things that really makes your life meaningful is the clear realization that you're headed somewhere better than you are now. And then it's even better if you also understand that there's a direct causal relationship between the things that you're doing and the steepness of that incline. There's two modes of being in the world, right? There's one where you adopt the responsibility for living properly, for being properly, and you make the sacrifices necessary for doing that, and then everything will flourish properly. And the other one is a pathway of resentment and bitterness and rejection and genocide. If you make your life 0.1% better a week, man, in 2 or 3 years, you're in such a better place than you were that it isn't even like the same domain. And if you keep that up for 10 years or 20 years, you know, especially if you're young and you start early, you start to straighten yourself out and fix the things that you can fix, you can transform your lives in ways that are completely unimaginable. And God only knows what the upper limit of that is in terms of human possibility. What you're actually made of, what you're made of is what you encounter when you voluntarily encounter the unknown. And so the more you voluntarily encounter the unknown, the more you get made of. And the more you get made of, the more there is to you. And then the more you're good at encountering the unknown and restructuring order and calling forth proper order out of the potential of being. And God, you got to think, why wouldn't you do that since you can do that? The fact that you're fragile is actually a precondition for your heroism, because if you weren't fragile, then there'd be nothing heroic about doing something difficult, right? Because if you couldn't be hurt or damaged or defeated or end up in failure, then where's the moral courage in the endeavor? It has to be that the fragility is built into the courage. People denigrate the opportunities that are right in front of them. And there's no reason to do that, because what's right in front of you is the majesty of being. That's what's right in front of you. It's inexhaustibly complex and full of potential, and there's no reason to assume that wherever you happen to be isn't as good a starting place as anywhere else. Well, I know some people have terrible, terrible lives. They're in situations that are absolutely unbearable. But I also do know that even situations like that can be made a hell of a lot worse by the worst kind of attitude. That's for sure.
People think that my knees are bad from a lot of running, and they're wrong. I wasn't born healthy. I wasn't born with some great body alignment, some great, I have sickle cell, I have all kind of health issues. I had a choice to make. And the choice was, growing up, okay, this hurts, that hurts. We can just sit down and do nothing. Or we can see how far we can push the human body. So on that journey, as I started getting more and more into my mind and started realizing that what I'm capable of doing, my mind got stronger. So the pain in my knees, while it sucked, I've been doing it for so long. It was like it became my new norm. Like, okay, my knees hurt, and I call it like stop feeling sorry for yourself, but you sometimes have to ignore your feelings. For me, I made a decision, and my decision was to be the best person I could. I basically, a lot of mornings I wake up and say, your feelings. And that doesn't mean like, don't take it literally, your feelings, but sometimes you have to go beyond what you're feeling. And my knees were, but guess what? I wanted to run. And I knew that, okay, you can get knee replacements, this and that. Like I said, it wasn't because I ran too much. People always want to say, oh man, you ran so much so you f***ed your body. You don't want to be like David Goggins. I hear it all the time. You don't want to be like David Goggins. I studied the darkness. You find no answers in the light. None. It's too happy. It's too nice. And we don't need to be taught how to live in happiness. That just comes naturally to us. Happy moments, but the dark times, man, you can't get there unless you put yourself there. Life will take you there. But when you get into those dark moments, it's what people, how are you able to write like this, man? I go to such places in my mind and I study the darkness. Like, it's not just physical. When I was growing up, and I saw my mom getting beaten, I got beat, and I was some stuttering little black kid in an all-white school, and I'm on stage, and I gotta say one line in front of 15 people, and I walk off stage because I can stutter. All those insecurities and all those things, man, I used to go home and cry. I'm like, oh my God, man, hang on, man. As I got older, we got to study. The only way we're going to get through this is study it. So every time I'm in a dark moment and life's up around me, whether it be physical or just life, I get in it, man, with a pen and paper. I'm like, okay, this sucks. I can feel like I'm losing my I can study this. You can't fit discipline into that. You can't fit structure. You can't fit consistency. You can't fit the grind. And then when you try, it just gets overrun by the clutter in your mental garage. I got to a point in my life where I realized this is life. And so I move on past things real quick. So people are like, oh my God, what are you going to do, David, if you can't run? I'll swim. Or I'll go to college, or I'll do something else. Like, this isn't my life. I'm very aware how quick life can take from you. And I've always prepared my mind for the next chapter. And what happened with me was I started this thing called front loading. So when I was young, I used to be a little piece of, like, oh, I'm not good enough. I can't do this. I can't do that. And the second I got my head out of my ass and I realized, man, you can achieve a lot of you get off your ass and start moving, and you start motivating yourself. Start becoming a self-motivator. So I started front loading. Every time I'm in a bad situation, I study it. And that's the only reason I do half the shit I do, is I'm studying this, because I know that I never thought I was going to be writing books and trying to help people get better. But I was always trying to do it because I knew I sucked. And so when you know you're trying to get somewhere, you know you suck, you know that you believe that you're a born loser, you are taking snapshots, man. Like, you see something on your phone, like, oh man, I'm going to take a snapshot of that. I do that in my mind. So I get in these moments where I'm like, okay, wow, that's good knowledge right there, man. I snapshot it because I know that I can use that later. I can use this because I'm not out there most people, they go out and they run. And they go out and do, and they're like, oh, this is beautiful. Look at mountains. And no, I don't like it. My body hurts. I'm hurting. How do we get through this? It's a lab. It's my mental lab.
Stop doing the things that you know are wrong that you could stop doing. Right? So it's a fairly limited attempt. First of all, we're not going to say that you know what the good is or what the truth is in any ultimate sense. But we will presume that there are things that you're doing that for one reason or another you know are not in your best interests. There's something about them that you just know you should stop. They're kind of self-evident to you. Other things you're going to be doubtful about. You're not going to know which way is up and which way is down. But there are things that you're doing that you know you shouldn't do. Now, some of those you won't stop doing for whatever reason. You don't have the discipline, or maybe there's a secondary payoff, or you don't believe it's necessary, or it's too much of a sacrifice, or you're angry or resentful or afraid. Who knows? So forget about those for now. But there's another subset that you could stop doing. It might be a little thing. Well, that's fine. Stop doing it and see what happens. And what'll happen is your vision will clear a little bit. And then something else will pop up in your field of apprehension that you will also know you should stop doing, and that you could stop doing, because you've strengthened yourself a bit by stopping doing the particular stupid thing that you were doing before. That just puts you together a little bit more. And you can do that repeatedly for an indefinite period of time. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to ever be able to formulate a clear and final picture of what constitutes the truth and the good. But it does mean that you'll be able to continually move away from what's untruth and what's bad. And that's not a bad start. You have to treat yourself like you matter, because if you don't, then you don't take care of yourself, and you become vengeful and cruel, and you take it out on people around you, and you're not a positive force. None of that's good. So you suffer more, and so does everyone around you. And there's a malevolence that enters into it. None of that's good. So that's what happens if you don't treat yourself like you matter. And then, well, what happens if you don't treat other people like they matter? Well,
You lie to them, you cheat them, you steal, you enter into impulsive relationships with them. They can't trust you. That doesn't go anywhere. They don't like you. You end up alone at best and maybe like incarcerated at worst. Like that doesn't work. And so you watch the people around you who thrive, regardless of what they say, they act out the proposition that everyone matters. And then you have a functional society. And I think, okay, well, if when you act out the proposition that everyone matters, you have a functional society, maybe that's evidence that that proposition is true. It's like, I think it's true. It's unbelievable how little genuine encouragement many people need and how they had none. No one ever said to them and meant it. It's not okay for you to be a weak loser. It's not okay. And the reason it's not okay is because you could be way more than that. And it's a crime, an ethical crime, for you to allow all that necessary potential to go to waste. It hurts you, it hurts your family, it hurts the world. Really, really, it does. And people think, oh, okay, I get it. And they do get it because they know at some level. And the other thing people tell me, you know, they say, well, I've been paying attention to your lectures, developing a vision for my life, trying to tell the truth, trying to adopt more responsibility, and things are way better. But the other story is, you've been able to help me put into words things I always knew to be true, but didn't know how to say, which is a good role for an intellectual to play. And so, well, so that's why this all makes me emotional. It's so good, you know, and so much of this has been covered as if it's political. It's not political what I'm doing. It's not political. I don't tell people that they're okay the way they are. No, I say, no, you could be way more than you are. And they're relieved about that, you see, because if you're in a dark and terrible place and someone says you're okay the way you are, then you don't know what to do about that. It's like, no, I'm not. I'm having a terrible time and I'm hopeless. You're okay the way you are. Well, then what? That's it? That's where I am? And what do you want to tell a young person? You're 17. You're okay the way you are. It's like, no, you're not. You got 60 years to be better, and you could be way better. You could be incomparably better across multiple dimensions. And in pursuing that better, that's where you'll find the meaning in your life. And that will give you the antidote to the suffering. People have asked me in my book why I wrote it as an antidote to chaos, you know, because, well, there isn't anything technically wrong with chaos. Chaos is a place of great potential. Well, the question is, what's the proper balance between chaos and order? Chaos, potential, and order. Well, the answer is, look, when you're a kid, you're all potential. It's chaotic potential. It can manifest itself in any number of ways. And maybe you don't want to give that up. So you're like Peter Pan. You want to be a kid forever because you don't want to give up the potential. And you look out in the world and all you see are Captain Hooks, you know, who've lost a hand, who are chased by death because that's the clock in the crocodile. It's already got a taste of him. He's terrified by death and he's a tyrant. Well, I don't want to grow up to be that. So I won't be disciplined at all. Well, that's no good. Because the way the potential transforms itself into actuality is through discipline. And so then you, as you said, this is the trick though. You have to pick a path of discipline. What path of discipline you have to pick is a different issue. So there could be a rule. The rule might not be follow this rule. The rule might be you have to follow some rules. So it's a meta rule. And the meta rule is you have to discipline yourself. And the issue is, well, how? That's not really the relevant question. You can pick a disciplinary path. That's why I often tell my clients, especially young people, they say, well, I don't know what to do. It's like, that's okay. Nobody does. Go do something. Do the best thing that you can think of. Put the best plan you have into practice. It's not going to be perfect, and it will change along the way. But it will change partly because you become disciplined pursuing the path. And as you become disciplined, you become wiser. And as you become wiser, you become able to formulate better and better plans. So you can start vaguely and confused and develop a plan that's not so great, and you start to implement it, and then you accrue incremental wisdom as you implement your flawed plan, and that enables you to fix the plan. And so that's part of that process of incremental self-improvement as well. You don't want someone else's fate. Man, your fate's enough, and your adventure's enough. It's plenty. It's more than you can ever fully realize. And so that's also part of the reason that we all believe that the individual has some intrinsic dignity. It's Don't be so sure that your position and your room is so damn trivial. It might be your attitude towards it that's trivial. And if you're in dire straits and dire circumstances, just look at how much opportunity you have to make things better. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday and not to who someone else is today. It's the same basic idea, right? Is that you have to get your markers for success right, because otherwise you can end up in the situation you described, which is that, like, there's always people out there who are doing far better than you on pretty much anything you want to imagine. And if all you're doing is seeing yourself in their reflected light, let's say, then it's going to be pretty damn dismal. But it's not a good comparison, because you shouldn't just compare. Well, first of all, there's danger in just comparing yourself to others, period, because they're not you, and God only knows what struggles they had to undertake to get to where they were, or what burdens they're currently carrying that you're not aware of. You just don't know any of that. But you can certainly contrast yourself with yourself. And that's a lot better. It is the only way. Well, it's also the only way of really measuring anything approximating proper improvement. You can actually tell when you're a little better than you were yesterday.
Right.
So, and you can actually do that. That's another thing that's so interesting about it, is that you can actually make yourself a little better in some way, pretty much, well, I don't know if it's at every moment, but you can certainly do it every day. It's funny. I mean, you know, obviously, if you have a problem and you think about it, you can think up a solution. And it's not obvious how you do that. You know, I mean, it's not like you know how you're manipulating your neurons or something.
Mm-hmm.
It happens of its own accord in some sense, like you can participate in it, I guess, and you can interfere with it, and it seems to take a certain amount of willpower, but it still all happens mysteriously behind the scenes. If you were properly oriented in life, if your spirit was in order, you'd aim at the highest thing that you could possibly imagine, and that would point you in the proper direction. And then you would attempt to treat everyone as if they had, including yourself, as if they had a value that was equivalent and related to that high order goal. And that's right. Why would you aim at anything other than the highest good you could imagine? It's like, why bother? Almost by definition. If you're going to aim, you might as well aim at what's good. If you're going to aim at what's good, you might as well aim at what's best. And maybe if you aimed at what was best and you managed to progress towards that, it would even be better if you could take everybody along for the ride. And even if you're too cynical and bitter and faithless and nihilistic to think that's a good idea, you can at least see the logic in it and the utility in it, the beauty in it. I'll give you another example. In the story of Exodus, there's a scene before Moses is called on by God to act as a leader of his people. And it's very interesting because the story lays out how you become a leader, like an actual leader, not a tyrant, not someone who's manipulating, not someone who's out for himself, but an actual leader. And that's a very difficult thing to get right. So in this scene, Moses is out walking along a path and minding his own business, and something sort of glimmers and gleams and glistens in the periphery of his vision, and he takes the time to deviate from his path and to investigate it. Now that's worth thinking about. Because it means something like this, you know, you're going about your business and something captures your attention, something captures your interest. And that's an interesting way of thinking about it too. Something captures your interest. And that's sort of how what's interesting makes itself manifest. You can't exactly choose what you're interested in. It sort of chooses you. And then you can decide whether or not you're going to pursue it or not, or ignore it, and you can decide how seriously you're going to pursue it. But you know perfectly well, you know this from being in school, even if you know you should study for a test, if you're not interested in the subject, it's virtually impossible. You can beat yourself with a stick and you can force yourself to do it, but you're going to fight yourself, and you're probably not going to do that great a job. Depends to some degree on your discipline. Whereas if you're interested in it,
it captures your attention, and then you pursue it, it's no problem. You enjoy it, like it engrosses you, and it's much easier to learn and to remember. And that's a real mystery, right? I mean, that's the sort of mystery that if you think about with any degree of seriousness, shows you how the world is constructed in a manner that's unlike what you might think. That things call to you. People often wonder how they should decide what to do with their life. And one answer to that is, well, you should see what interests you. You should pay attention to that. And there's kind of two parts to that, because things that interest you, they come in two flavors. One is positive. You're interested and engrossed. There's something you love, some opportunity that beckons, some doors that open, and you can see them, and you're eager and enthusiastic to move in that direction. And you find yourself compelled and motivated and enjoying what you're doing. And then there's problems that interest you, and that's more negative. You'll have something that's bothering you, obsessing you, that you can't get rid of, some problem that is paramount. It might be personal, it might be conceptual, it might be political. It's the axe you're inclined to grind. And it's kind of arbitrary too, because there's a million things in the world you could be worried about that could bother you, that could make themselves manifest as problems, but there's a small subset that are apparently your problem. And people will ask you, your wife will ask you, what's your problem? And that's a good question. What is your problem? And you might think, well, I don't want to have any problems. It's like, well, good luck with that, first of all. And second, it's not so obvious that you'd rather not have any problems, because, well, then what would you do? And that's an interesting way to think about your problems, is that if they're your problems, maybe what you have to do is solve them. And you might think, well, I don't know how. It's like, if you knew how, it wouldn't be a problem. Right, so you have to sort yourself out to solve the problem. You'd have to learn way more than you know to solve the problem. You'd have to become way more than you are to be the person who could address that problem. But then you could see, if addressing the problem calls you to be the person that you could be, well, then the problem is an opportunity too. And so then you might think, well, destiny calls to you in the form of opportunities that beckon and problems that compel. And you could take those problems on as your obligation and responsibility, and you could pursue your interests with some degree of seriousness, and who the hell knows where you'd end up. Well, the Exodus story tells you. Moses goes off the path to pay attention to this phenomenon that captures his interest. Phenomenon, the word is from a Greek word, phanesthai, which means to shine forth. And things do that in the world all the time. They capture your attention. That's what happens when you fall in love. Something shines forth. You don't choose that. It happens to you, weirdly enough. What happens to you? Well, who knows? And who knows what's behind it? It's not random. That doesn't mean it's comprehensible. So Moses goes and checks out this phenomenon, and he approaches it, and as he gets closer, he can see that it's a living form. It's a bush. It's a tree. It's on fire, and that's a strange paradox, right? Because obviously, a tree that's on fire would burn into ashes, and trees don't just stand there and burn. Although actually they do, because living things are on fire. They oxidize and they transform, and everything living is like that. So everything living is a combination of being and becoming. And that's particularly obvious in the case of living things, but it's true for everything, because nothing is static in its form. It is what it is, and it is what it's going to be at the same time. And the burning bush is being and transformation at the same time. And fire is something that's intrinsically attractive to human beings. Like, we're definitely the descendants of the first ape who couldn't keep his bloody hands off fire, and then mastered it. And you can sit around a campfire and look at it forever. It's one of those things that grips your interest intrinsically. You never get bored by it. It's just endlessly fascinating. It's partly because it transforms constantly, like music, you know. Music and fire share that in common, and not accidentally. And so a burning bush, it's a compelling, it's paradoxical too. It's static, because it still has this tree-like form, and that tree-like form is sort of emblematic of life, and it's burning. And so Moses is very focused on this, and he approaches it more and more closely, and a voice appears, speaks out of the bush and says, "Stop, you're beginning to tread on holy ground." Well, when Tammy talked, she said, well, in essence, she said, what would happen if you listened seriously? And the answer is, well, the more seriously you listened, the more the person you're listening to would reveal themselves, and they'd reveal themselves more and more deeply. And that would be true whether you're listening to your wife or your husband or your friend or whoever you're listening to, because people will tell you everything, including all sorts of things you don't want to know, if you listen. And so you might come to understand that if people aren't telling you, then you're not listening. And if the people around you aren't that interesting, it's because you're not listening. If you were listening, they'd be so interesting you wouldn't even want to be anywhere near them. The people are no shortage of interesting, because people are crazy and strange and demented and peculiar, and they're full of twists and tangles and snakes. And if they tell you what they're really up to, man, it's interesting. When I talked about hierarchies, now it's very important where you are in your hierarchical position with regards to other people in relationship to your mental health. And this is a really important thing to understand, because you have an ancient counter in your brain, and that was the point of the biological comparisons, lobsters being one set of comparisons, but not only lobsters. We know perfectly well, animal behaviorists, people who know their neuropsychopharmacology, know perfectly well that the serotonergic system operates quite similarly across most animals with complex nervous systems, and one of the things that it does is track relative status position. And in birds, wrens, which is another example I used, a lot of it is power. You know, wren's a little bird. It's quite a cute bird. It sings very nicely, and you think it's harmless, but it's not. It's a vicious little character. And I used to sit in my backyard and record wren songs on my tape recorder, and the wren that lived in our backyard would dive bomb it, 4 inches away, and it was very brave of him. And he had a little nest that was up in a tree, and there were some nests that we had built, birdhouses, in the neighborhoods nearby, in the yards nearby. And he would go, like half his day spent stuffing those other birdhouses with sticks, so full that no bird could get in them. It was like, this is my damn yard, which is what he was saying when he was singing so beautifully. And you better look the hell out, because if you build, I'm going to stuff your damn house with sticks, and if I see you sitting on a branch, I'm going to dive bomb you and knock you off. And that's power, and that's what wrens do, despite the fact that they're cute. And chickens do the same thing. There are pecking orders among chickens, and virtually every animal. Wolf packs organize themselves into hierarchies, and chimpanzees organize themselves into hierarchies, and there are rat hierarchies, and hierarchical organization is the rule among animals that live somewhat socially, and even those who don't, that occupy the same geographical territory. There has to be some way of organizing access to relatively scarce resources that doesn't result in chronic combat. Because chronic combat, well, look, you're Wren A and you're Wren B, and you decide to have it out, so you peck yourselves half to death, and you're Wren C, and so you got a little bit more patience. You just wait until those two wrens beat each other to death, and then you move in. It's like it's a stupid solution. It doesn't even work for wrens, let alone people. And so, the wrens announce their prowess, and they do that with the quality of their song and their displays, and they indicate to one another who shouldn't be messed with, and then there's a minimum of combat. And you could make a pretty good case that that's power, But it's not like wrens get together and build like wren apartment houses and then go out on collective worm hunt insects, I guess, collective insect hunting expeditions and bring them all back and distribute them, and, or make insect farms so that there's more insects for all the wrens. They haven't got that far, you know. They're competing in a zero-sum game. And that isn't what human beings do. We figured out how to not have zero-sum games a very, very long time ago. And it turns out that if the game you're playing isn't zero-sum, right, which means that there's only a finite number of resources and everybody has to fight to the death for them, and some are going to get the lion's share and others are going to starve. If you're not playing a zero-sum game, then you can learn to cooperate and compete in an intelligent and civilized manner, and all of a sudden, there's more than enough for everyone. Now, still, some people are going to have more than others, you know, but there's nothing. How are you going to stop that? And do you want to? Like, do you want to only know what, do you want to only be allowed to know what everyone else knows? You don't get to know anything that anyone else knows, because it's got to be equal. You want everyone to be exactly the same amount of attractive. You know, and if you averaged attractiveness overall and you only allowed each person to be as attractive as the average person, there'd be not much attractiveness left in the world. And it seems to me that that would be quite the loss, you know. And strength, you're not allowed to have any additional strength or ambition or talent or let's say athletic ability. It's like, or artistic ability. I mean, aren't we kind of happy that there's massive inequality in the distribution of talent? I know it's harsh and hard, but you can't expect everybody to have every talent that there is, and it would be a hell of a sacrifice if no one got to have any talent, because it wouldn't be fair. And so I don't get the whole equality of outcome thing. It isn't going to work. There aren't that many geniuses, you know. We want to exploit the geniuses and get them to work for us. And if the price is that somebody has more than you do of something, well, suck it up, for Christ's sake. Well, Jesus, seriously, man. It's like, look, how much more do you have than most people have? You know, you need to make $30,000 a year to be in the top 1% of the socioeconomic distribution worldwide. You know, you always hear about the 1%. Right, the evil 1%. And they churn, by the way, because it's not the same people all the time. It's like all of you here are in the evil 1%, and you think, well, that's not very fair, because I was really only talking about within my country. Well, that's convenient for you, you know. It makes it really, really convenient argument for you. It's like, well, all those other people, those foreigners, they don't count. If they're poor, who the hell cares? It's the Australians that matter. You know, and so, no, that's a non-starter. You know, and by historical standards, you're doing a hell of a lot better than the top 1%, I can tell you that. I read a nice article by a coalition called Human Progress the other day, and they were comparing the typical middle-class person who lives now with Rockefellers in the 1919s, and say, well, would you rather be a middle-class person now or Nelson Rockefeller in 1919? And the answer seemed pretty damn clear that, well, you know, if you were Nelson Rockefeller, then you would have been richer than anyone else. And there's something to be said for that status, right? Because people do like to have more than others. I don't know if it's a good thing or not, but it is one of the things that we like. And so you'd have that. You'd be richer than everyone else. But there'd be all sorts of things that you have that now that Nelson Rockefeller wouldn't have had a hope of purchasing, like the antibiotics that he would have needed to stop his son from dying, for example, you know, just as a start. And so I think this complaint about inequality, look, no one likes inequality exactly. You walk down the street, this is why I always get a kick out of people who protest, I'm against poverty. It's like, really? You're against poverty. And you think that's a unique enough attribute so that it was worth your time to make a sign that said that you were against poverty and show other people. It's like, I've never met anyone that was for poverty. You know, you walk down the street with someone who's pretty well off, you know, and they've got 1920s spats on and a bowler, and they're feeling pretty damn rich, and a Stockster certificate sticking out of their back pocket, and, you know, there's a homeless person there, and they give them a good kick, and they say, the more poverty, the better. It's like, no. You know, when people walk down the street and you see homeless people, and they're often, homelessness is a complex problem. Like you think, well, homeless people are poor. It's like, yeah, man. That's like one problem they have out of 50. And like I've worked with poor people, you know, in my clinical practice, and poor in multiple dimensions. And many of them, you gave them money, they were just done. Especially if they were like alcoholics and cocaine addicts. As long as they were broke, they had some hope of living through the next month. But as soon as their unemployment check showed up, man, they were face down in the ditch 3 days later, right? Nothing but cocaine and alcohol with all their idiot friends for 3 days. And then they'd show up back in my practice saying, you know, God, I relapsed again. I said, well, what happened? Well, my money came in. It's like, yeah, money's really going to do you a hell of a lot of good. It'll just kill you faster than poverty. Now, not that there's anything good about poverty, but it's not like these are simple problems. You know, you walk down the street and you see someone who's been an alcoholic for 20 years and maybe they're addicted to methamphetamines as well, or maybe they're schizophrenic. It's like, it isn't unequal distribution of monetary resources that is the primary cause for that problem, and it isn't going to be some sort of straightforward redistribution that's going to fix it, because it's way more complicated than that. And so, and then the whole power thing too. It's like, look, I get it. I get the left wing issue, and I really do. And I think I get it better than the damn left-wingers get it. Because, you know, most of the radical types, they follow Marx, and they say, well, one of Marx's dictums was that capital tended to accumulate in the hands of fewer and fewer people. Here's another rule. Pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. This is also a great thing to know, I think. That's a tricky rule. Expedient might be, we're going to have a conversation, and I want something from you. And a lot of conversations are like that, you know, because you have a goal in mind. This is what I want from this person. And so then you craft your conversation to get what you want, right? You subordinate your words to the ethic of your desire. And you might say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, what do you know about what you want? Like, haven't you been wrong about that before? Or you might say, well, what's the alternative? Well, is there an alternative? Well, you have to want something from the person to even interact with them. It's like, no, you could want to see what happens. You could want to play. You could tell the truth. That's an interesting thing to do, because you don't know what's going to happen if you tell the truth, that's for sure. You could let go of what you want and just say what you think. And you could presume, and this is an act of faith too, that the truth does set you free, and that the truth that's spoken properly makes out of possibility the order that is habitable and good, and then you could just tell the truth, and you could see what happens, and that would be an adventure, and that's better than expediency, partly because maybe you're wrong about what you want. You know, and you know that because you're kind of narrow and maybe narrowly self-serving from time to time, and your purview of the world isn't as wide as it could be, and you're a bit bitter, so you tend to be that narrowly selfish because of that. And so you want something from a conversation, and you bend and twist it to get it. It's like, fine, but maybe you'll get something you don't want. Or worse, you'll get something that's positively bad for you. That happens a lot. And so part of the reason there's a deep moral injunction to tell the truth in a religious sense is because there's a hypothesis behind that, which is there isn't anything better that can happen to you than what will happen to you if you tell the truth. Now, that might be hidden from you because sometimes if you tell the truth, and I don't mean to blurt everything out carelessly, like this is a sophisticated thing to do. It's not careless. It doesn't mean just say any old thing that pops into your head. You have to be judicious with the truth. But the notion would be, if something emerges as a consequence of engaging truthfully, and it doesn't seem to be going your way, wait. There's more to the story to unfold, because like, how do you know if it goes your way or not? Like, over what time span are you calculating this? Because sometimes things can go pretty badly initially and then much better as they progress. And lots of times the truth has that effect, because you reveal something that's maybe disturbing or shocking even to yourself and to others, and it causes waves, especially if it's a deep truth, and that destabilizes everything. It's like, yeah, but maybe that's preferable to a false peace. You can't find out if it's true without doing it. You're not going to gather the evidence beforehand. So that's the truth side of it. Meaning, pursue what's meaningful instead of what's expedient. It's another hint, like the spirit of play, about the pathway. The yin and yang symbol, the famous symbol, it's two serpents, one black, one white, head to tail. Inside the black serpent, there's a white dot, and inside the white serpent, there's a black dot. And the representation is something like the world of your experience is made up of chaos and order. And order is where you are when things are going according to what you want. And chaos is everything that can come in and disrupt that. And both of those can be positive and negative. Too much order, tyranny, right? Too much chaos, nihilistic uncertainty. Optimized balance. So let's think about what the optimized balance would mean. You have a structure of perception and conception that you inhabit. It's orderly, reasonably orderly. Orderly enough so that when you inhabit it, most of the time things are going the way you want them to go. But things change and shift, and you don't know everything you should know. So you can't just stay where you are with a good thing. You have to expand. And as you expand, you move out of the domain of order into the domain of chaos, or out of the domain of actuality into the domain of possibility. And then you might think, well, how do you know when you're doing that optimally? Well, one marker, as I said before, maybe that you do it in the spirit of play. But another is, and this is so much worth knowing, things get meaningful. People ask, does life have any meaning? It's like, why is anything worth doing if in 4 billion years the sun is going to envelop the earth? And the answer to that question is, that's a stupid question. And I can prove that in some sense. It's like, you're a mother and your baby's crying, and so you're going over there to do something about it. And someone comes along and says, why do you care if that baby's crying? In 4 billion years, the sun is going to envelop the earth. And what's the right response to that? It's something like, go away. Are you out of your mind? And the answer to that question is yes, you are out of your mind. Of course, you can find a time frame or a spatial frame of reference that makes everything you do pointless. It's like, what is this going to matter in 20 trillion years? Well, it's like, the only proper response to that is that's not a wise time frame. Imagine you're in a concert, listening to some great music, and it's got you, and someone taps you on the shoulder, and this is going to come to an end. And well, what's your response? Like, go away. And that's the right response to that voice in your head that does those things to you, which says, you're engaged in something, and a nihilistic thought comes out. Well, what's the point of this, given, how unbearable the world is in the current political situation, and the fact that we're inhabiting some ball of dust on the edge of some fringe part of the cosmos, and that everything's dead and material. It's like, get thee behind me, Satan, right? Really. It's not a mark of wisdom. It's not a mark of wisdom to let nihilistic, demonic voices steal your joie de vivre. That is not a mark of wisdom. And you might object, well, at least it's not naive. It's like, yeah, cynicism might be preferable to naivety, but it doesn't hold a candle to wisdom. And that's worth knowing too. Because once you've been hurt and you're cynical, there's no going back to naive. But there's no point in staying at cynical. And there are degrees of courage way beyond cynicism. And some of that is the regaining of the faith you had as a child despite your current level of wisdom. And that's something to strive for, right? That's a moral attainment. That's not a burying your head back in the sand. Quite the contrary. And so, well, back to the yin and yang symbol. Imagine you have an instinct that orients you. Well, you do, as a matter of fact. There's a reflex that's replicated at multiple levels of your nervous system, and it's ancient. If you have a nervous system as an animal, you have this reflex. And the reflex is something like surprise. You know, if I walk across the stage and I hear a loud noise behind me, I might go like this. And that would be automatic because I'm gripped by unconscious systems. And what's happening is some chaos has emerged and it stops me in my tracks because something unexpected happened, my current plan is incomplete. And then I'll turn and orient towards the place of the disturbance. And that's the beginning of exploratory behavior. And then I might run away, which might make me safe, or I might cautiously investigate, in which case I can find out what caused the disturbance, maybe rectify it, and maybe update my plan so that that sort of thing doesn't happen again. That's a better approach. And I would say you don't just have to face the reality of unjust suffering and death in your life. You have to face the reality of hell. And you might say, well, I don't believe in hell. It's like, well, do you believe in Nazi Germany? You know, do you believe in the Stalinist Soviet Union or Maoist China or Cambodia? That's hell. And you can assess that more deeply. You could say, well, that's not even hell. That's not as precise a formulation of hell as you might be able to conceptualize. Hell is actually participation in the process that led to the establishment of those countries. And that's something that human beings do. And the fact that we do that is something we have to face. And maybe that's even worse than death. And I think you can make a case for that. I really do. I think there are things in life that are worse than death. There are things in life that are worse than unjust suffering and death. And the things that lead to hell are worse. And you might think, well, I don't have to worry about that. It's like, yeah, you do, as a matter of fact, because you're going to face those things too. And you're going to face that when you face your own malevolence, which you will, and you're going to face that when you face the malevolence of others, including the mob. And some of that's just death and tragedy, and some of it is something far darker and deeper than that. And so, yeah, you face that. And so that's kind of interesting. And then you might think, well, how should you face that? And that's where Tammy's story is relevant. It's like, well, so she went and swam with the sharks. And I wasn't very happy about that because our life has been adventurous enough. I thought, do you really need to go swim with the sharks? And the answer seemed to be, well, that would be an adventure. And, you know, I don't interfere with her when she's having an adventure. She's going to go have an adventure. It's far be it for me to interfere. And then she told me, you know, that you had to look the shark in the eye or it would think you're prey. Think, well, what do you have to look in the eye so you're not prey? And, you know, human beings have been trying to figure that out for a long time because we're strange animals, because we're predators, but we're also prey. And so I guess at any moment you're sort of deciding, well, are you a predator? Are you the thing that's on top or are you prey? And you're prey if you turn tail and run. And there's a psychological truth there, like a deep psychological truth. And it seems to be something like if you practice forthright and voluntary exposure to that which terrifies and dismays you, it transforms you. And we really know this as psychologists. We even know there's more and more evidence suggesting, for example, that if you imagine you adopt this attitude of voluntary confrontation, that changes you psychophysiologically. So much of the biochemistry of motivation and emotion is transformed when you take a stressor which could be oppressive and paralyze you and cause you to withdraw, and you reverse that and you decide to advance. It's like a different spirit inhabits you. And I mean this physiologically. There's a whole different pattern of being that makes itself manifest in you neurologically and psychophysiologically and pharmacologically. So you take it on as a challenge.
right? And that transforms you at a cellular level too, because one of the things we've discovered in recent years is that if you do something new and complex, then that turns on that parts of your DNA that haven't produced proteins before will start producing new proteins and reconstruct you from the cellular level up. So it's a deep transformation. We have no idea how deep. And again, you could ask yourself, if you didn't withdraw in fear from anything from everything that life threw at you, who could you become? And I would say that's the central religious question in some real deep sense. You know, are more things thrown at us than we can manage? Well, that's a tricky question, because pretty dreadful things are thrown our way. And you might say, well, that's just presents an insuperable barrier to progress. That's not very helpful, because you're alive, here you are, you got these problems to contend with, and if it's an impossible task, then how could you be anything but hopeless and desperate? But then you think, well, wait a second, how would things transform if I took this on as a voluntary adventure? You know, regardless of its scope, and the scope would include unjust suffering, death, and hell. And that's not just some religious or metaphysical vision. It's like, no, you're actually going to have to contend with that in your life, in whatever way those things make themselves manifest to you personally. That's coming, man. And so maybe you better get prepared. And then the question might be, well, what would happen if you got prepared? And the answer might be, you'd be prepared. And I think the religious enterprise in its deepest sense is that process of preparation. And you know, you might want to even push that a bit farther. You might say, well, not only do you want to get prepared for what's coming your way, but you want to be so prepared that when it comes your way, that it doesn't make you bitter and resentful and tempted by the desire to walk the path that would make all of that even worse. And so you might say, well, if you could really face up to what you need to face up to, not only could you turn yourself into someone that could bear the catastrophe of life and exposure to hell, but maybe you could turn yourself into someone who would still do good even while facing those things. And that's a pretty noble goal, you know, because it's realistic. It's not naive at all. It says, look, man, you know, trouble's coming your way, and it's real. And yet it's possible that you could confront that and still do good in the deepest sense. It's like, well, that's quite something. It would be really quite something if that's true. And one of the preconditions of that would be faith, I suppose. And in some sense, that's what Tammy was manifesting when she went down and swam with the sharks. Faith that if she looked the bloody predator in the eye, that would solve the problem. And then you think too, well, could it be any other way? It's like, well, we have all these problems in our lives, and we could think there's two possible ways of approaching those problems. One would be we just ignore them in the hopes they would what? Go away? Well, and no one thinks that's, no one who isn't a child thinks that, and very few children. Nobody believes that. We know perfectly well that if you got to face something, man, you better face it. And if you're going to face it, that's probably the best pathway forward. And then you might think, well, what does that mean ultimately? And it might mean something like, face it, you know, as deeply as you possibly can and as voluntarily as you possibly can. And there's an element of faith in that, because you have to put yourself on the line. But you're kind of stuck with that anyways. You know, that's the rub.
So, you know, one way of conceptualizing yourself is that you're one speck of dust among 7 billion. And when you conceptualize yourself that way, you might think, well, what difference does it make what I say or do? And that's actually quite convenient for you, because if it doesn't matter what you say or do, then you don't have any responsibility and you can do whatever you want. The price you pay for that is a bit of nihilism, but if you don't have to shoulder any responsibility, that's a small price to pay. Another That's the underground motivation for nihilism. But the other way of looking at it, and this is actually the accurate way of looking at it, is that you're in a network. You're a node in a network, and so you can do a little bit of arithmetic very rapidly and just figure out how powerful you are. You know 1,000 people. You're going to know more than that over the course of your life, but let's say 1,000 for the sake of argument for now. They know 1,000 people. That means that you're one person away from 1,000,000 people and 2 persons away from 1,000,000,000 people. And you're the center of that network. And now the way networks work is that information propagates in a networked manner. So don't underestimate the power of your speech. Now, you know, Western culture is phallogocentric. Let's say it. Okay, so we'll say, yeah, that's just fine. That's exactly what it is. It's predicated on the idea of the logos, that the logos is the sacred element of Western culture. And what does that mean? It means that your capacity for speech is divine. It's the thing that generates order from chaos and then sometimes turns pathological order into chaos when it has to. Don't underestimate the power of truth. There's nothing more powerful. Now, in order to speak what you might regard as the truth, you have to let go of the outcome. You have to think, all right, I'm going to say what I think, stupid as I am, biased as I am, ignorant as I am. I'm going to state what I think as clearly as I can, and I'm going to live with the consequences no matter what they are. Now, the reason you think that, that's an element of faith. The idea is that nothing brings a better world into being than the stated truth. Now, you might have to pay a price for that, but that's fine. You're going to pay a price for every bloody thing you do and everything you don't do. You don't get to choose to not pay a price. You get to choose which poison you're going to take. That's it. So if you're going to stand up for something, stand up for your truth. It'll shape you because people will respond and object and tell you why you're a fool and a biased moron and why you're ignorant. And then if you listen to them, you'll be just that much less like that the next time you say something. And if you do that for 5 years, you'll be so damn tough and articulate and able to communicate and withstand pressure that you won't even recognize yourself. And then you'll be a force to contend with. And you don't get to wait until, because I get letters like Gad Saad gets all the time too, from faculty members in particular, and they say, well, you know, when I get tenure, it's like, then they think, well, when I'm an associate professor, and then they think, well, when I'm a full professor, it's like, if you're a professor already, you're like the most protected person in the history of the planet, you know, and you need, well, okay, but one of the things that indicates is that it's almost impossible to provide people with enough protection so that they feel safe to speak. Okay, so we'll address that directly. It is not safe to speak, and it never will be. But the thing you got to keep in mind is that it's even less safe not to speak. Right? It's a balance of risks. It's like you want to pay the price for being who you are and stating your mode of being in the world, or do you want to pay the price for being a bloody serf, one that's enslaved him or herself? Well, that's a major price, man. That thing unfolds over decades, and you'll just be a miserable worm at the end of about 20 years of that, right? No self-respect, no power, no ability to voice your opinions, nothing left but resentment because everyone's against you, because of course you've never stood up for yourself. It's like, say what you think carefully, pay attention to your words. The price is, it's a price you want to pay if you are willing to believe that truth is the cornerstone of society. And in the most real sense, if you're willing to take that leap, then tell the truth and see what happens. And nothing better could possibly happen to you. There'll be ups and downs, and there'll be pushback, and there'll be controversy and all of that, but it doesn't matter. The truth is what makes the world, the truth is what redeems the world from hell, and that's the truth. And we saw plenty of hell over the last 100 years, you know, and we haven't learned a bloody thing from it. It's like, wake up, tell the truth, or at least don't lie. That's a start. And you got to understand that's a risk. But I have one more brief thing to say about that. So, you know, I said what I had to say back in September, and I'm sure that I could have done it better, and many people have told me how I could have done it better, although it didn't mean they would actually do it, but and you know, my job was at risk, serious risk, for about 2 months, and it destabilized my family, who've been very brave about this, so like, thumbs up to them, man. They've just stood by me. But here's the optimistic news, is the university has left me alone completely. I shook hands with the dean 2 weeks ago. We're on friendly terms. They don't want this to go any farther than it has already. The students were tremendously welcoming when I came back to teach in January. I haven't had a single negative incident at the university. And I've received thousands of letters from people all over the world, all of which have been in support. I've received 2 negative letters. That's it. 2. So the people have an inchoate longing to have the sort of thing that we're talking about articulated. And so don't be thinking you're alone. It's just that people can't talk, they're afraid to talk, or they don't know what to say. And those are real problems. So if you're reasonably articulate, like, start talking and sharpen yourself up. I mean, the enemy is a cloud. They're a cloud of gnats. They're only courageous in groups. They're only courageous in mobs. If you stand your ground and don't apologize and articulate things properly, they'll disperse around you like they're not even there. So most of it's illusion. So don't be afraid, but be afraid of the right thing. And the right thing you should be afraid of is not saying what you say, because that's the same as not being. And here you are, suffering away. You might as well be at the same time. At least then there's something to you. So.
So I'd be interested in hearing some more impressions. If you'd be kind enough to deliver some of them. What are your favorites?
Let me conjure up the gods here.
That is what I'm trying to do, when I'm doing that. It's like, let's get those words out of the chaos.
It is helpful when I saw you looking up, because everybody has this shame when they're thinking, and you look down. So that's a habit I pulled from you. You're not even in my impressions, but it just conveys confidence. When you're thinking, to go, you're going to put your head up and make yourself vulnerable. Opposed to, what did she like in bed?
I hadn't really thought about it as a more open posture, but that's right. It is a more open posture. Well, and you're also, turning your eyes heavenward symbolically, and you embody your meanings. That's the deepest sense of meaning, is what's embodied, right? What you're actually acting out. And it is a form of searching for the words, to find them, not to calculate them, but to find them. That's how Moses crossed the Red Sea, by looking for a firm foundation in the chaos.
We all know that.
Yeah. Well, that's a good thing to know, because you'll find some chaos, and you need to know how to get through it. And you look for a firm foundation, and you can feel your words, and they can be solid, and then you're okay, or as okay as you can be. And so, okay. So,
or as Donald Trump says, Rosie O'Donnell, what a fat pig, right? What a fat pig. Did you see his video about him talking about Ozempic?
No.
Oh my God.
No.
Oh, this will cure any depression. I would say get rid of those Xanax and go watch. It just surfaced. I was in bed sick the other day and I just cried laughing. He's talking about a friend of his who's on Ozempic. And he's like, I have this friend, he's a billionaire, right? And he takes the fat shot drug, right? The fat shot drug. Then he's in London. He says, it costs $12. I'm here getting the fat drug, the fat shot, and it costs $1,300 in the US. And he's calling Ozempic the fat shot. And I just thought, that's the funniest thing I've ever heard in my life.
He's very underestimated as a comedian.
He's starting to get the credit, I think.
I think he is. He's very funny in a Bill Burr sort of way. Bill Burr was particularly funny.
Right. When he was a little funnier, right? Now he's talking about Black Lives Matter, right? These white guys, these Jordan Petersons, right? These pseudo-intellects, right? On a Monday, doing the podcast now, he's brutal, right? He's always getting gum off his fingers, right? What is he doing? What is he, tickling a child? No, it's brutal. It's brutal. No, I used to love Bill.
Yeah.
That was one of the first I did, Bill Burr.
That was good. Oh, you know that.
I did a Bill Burr master class. I did the whole prosthetic bald thing, and it was him teaching young comedians how to do comedy, and he just would lose his cool, and just grab the microphone from him. So I booked a studio like this. That was one of the blessings of, I guess, not getting an agent and all that stuff, was I had to just make my own stuff.
Yeah, you had more freedom.
Yeah, so that was one of the first, was the Bill Burr teaching kids.
Show me some more.
Oh God. What else do I do? All right, this is Owen Wilson. You know Owen
Yeah.
Wilson? Owen Wilson, if he was a dog. Okay. See. Bow wow. That's it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, that's good.
it. That's one
good.
I would call my stupidest joke,
Yeah.
but works better than almost anything I do. And
I think it works because, well, it's certainly not too long.
It's
So
very
they say
short.
brevity is the
Yeah,
soul
yeah.
of wit, right? But that you had the mannerisms and you got the voice dead on.
Sure.
So it's worth the apprehension and it pays off, even though it's a very small dose.
And it's what I grew up on. I think I definitely turned very bitter from all the stuff happening in the world and stuff. You know, I'm sure I've seen you go through ebbs and flows of being softer and interviews where I could tell you're, a little more hard. But I do want to get back to that silly, just silly physical comedy, stuff everybody can laugh at.
Yeah.
I had to go in really hard on all the stuff, the wokeism and all that stuff. And that'll be a gift that is laid out forever.
It's nice to be able to do things with a sense of play.
Yeah.
That's the optimal state if you can manage that.
That's also,
Even with serious things. That's hard.
it's a good test of when I do have the courage to approach a person of the opposite sex to ask them for coffee before getting dragged away by security. I am testing for playfulness.
Yeah.
I'll always do something a little playful, a little silly, and see if they recoil or if they play along a bit.
Right.
Yesterday I went and I just
Right. Well, that's why little boys and little girls play together, so that they can learn how to play together.
and I'm stuck in this little boy body here.
So let's see some more impressions if you're
some
inclined.
more.
Yeah.
Well, what else do I do? I do the what you remember when Mitch McConnell he froze up when he was talking.
Yeah.
So I do a joke about our politicians are so old, no one even notices when they have strokes because he really froze for a while. He was doing and the fellow vice sure now. And I'll hold that for about 10 minutes on stage. I'll just hold it until people stop laughing.
That's 1/9 of the whole set.
That's the Mitch. I'm very dedicated. 20 minutes is me as Biden trying to get up the stairs. I just do it in real time.
So now you said that you're not scripting your sets.
I used to have a set list on, and I'd go boom, 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 boom,
Yeah.
boom, because I had never done a full hour. You do these comedy club sets that are 10 to 15 minutes.
Right.
With 10
Right.
people.
90. You're doing 90 minutes now.
Sometimes I'll do 90,
Yeah.
80 to 90.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And it also helps me rely on myself and not have someone go out there and warm up the crowd. Because
Right. You have to warm up your own crowd.
I have to
Are
warm
you
up my
getting
own-
better at it?
Yeah.
What are you learning?
Well, you go out and you might just feel what the energy is.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're rustling around, and the other night I just got a vacuum from backstage, and I just vacuumed the crowd for 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
Until they settled down.
Till they focused.
And it's-
One of the things I tell speakers is not to start speaking until everyone is silent, right? Because if you start speaking before they're silent, you've given them permission to rustle around and talk.
Right.
So you wait. And if you wait, everyone will go silent, partly because they're wondering what the hell's going on,
Yeah.
right? Because they're expecting you to start. So you just wait. Then it's dead silent. Then you wait a little longer because you want people thinking, what the hell's going on here? Then they're paying attention. Then you go. That's
Right.
much better.
And I saw you do that at the Beacon. And as a comedian, you might go, I liked what Jordan did. You know what? I'm going to hold it for 10 more seconds. And
Yeah.
maybe I'll walk off.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Man in the Moon, who was that? Kaufman.
Andy Kaufman.
Kaufman.
Yes.
He would do that
Yes.
on live TV, right? Hold that silence till the producers were willing to pull the plug and then he'd
Brilliant.
start. Yeah, yeah,
He
yeah.
definitely influenced me
Yeah,
quite a bit.
it takes a lot of confidence to do that, to hold that silence.
If you take a risk like that up top, though, the crowd also might trust you and go, geez, that guy's got some balls.
Yeah.
We might be a little more submissive now.
Well, the crowd wants to know. The crowd is hoping that there's a reason they're there paying attention to you. And if you don't think that there's a reason, if you're not in
screwed.
control, and I don't mean command, I mean if you're not orchestrating the event, well, what the hell good are you? Right? I mean, you're the one that's point of focus, and so it's up to you to indicate some confidence
You have to.
and some invitation.
You know, one thing about the dopamine system that's so important and also explains a lot of pathology, but also a lot of human evolution, is that we have basically one major reward system, which is the dopaminergic system. You know, I sometimes like the analogy that, you know, nowadays you hear about cryptocurrency or the dollar versus the euro versus the this versus the that. There's only one currency in all of reality, actually, and it's dopamine. Whether or not it's the dollar-backed dopamine or it's euro-backed dopamine or Bitcoin-backed dopamine, in the end, whether or not someone has $1 billion or $2 is really that currency resides as something that's transacted in the real world, but their notion of power and potential is dopaminergic. And so too, the potential for mates, the potential for food, how much food you have, you know, how much meat you have stored in the freezer tells you a lot about your security and well-being for you and your family, right? And that is translated into a dopaminergic internal representation of how safe and secure you are, et cetera. So this system of fear versus confrontation taps directly into the dopaminergic system. And there's a beautiful set of studies that were done in the 1960s, published in the journal Science, as you know, one of the top journals to publish in. Again, this is not work that I did, but where they gave people, human beings, the option to stimulate a number of different brain areas, just sitting in the clinic. And some brain areas would evoke feelings of drunkenness, others would evoke feelings of anger, others of sadness, others of sexual arousal. And the area that these subjects all preferred to stimulate the most, in fact, they would just sit there and lever press pretty much all day long, was this midline thalamus area. And the subjective feeling that they reported, I find this interesting and would love your thoughts on this, is one of mild frustration, anticipation of something, although they didn't know what.
Yeah, anticipation.
And it's this idea, I think, that it's tapping into the dopamine system. And the dopamine system...
Well, the dopamine system says something good is going to happen.
That's right. The key...
It says something good is going to happen. Something good is going to happen. And it's an appetitive state in some sense, because it doesn't signify the acquisition of... It's not satiating. Right. It's appetitive.
That's right.
And so it drives you forward. And you might think that being driven forward would be unpleasant, but if you're, in some sense, if you're activating the systems that drive you forward voluntarily, then that's the most positive form of positive reinforcement you can have. I think I read animal researchers who said that when they watched animals who were bar pressing to receive stimulation in those brain areas, the animals would look forward as if something was about to appear that they wanted to have appear.
Incredible.
So that was part of that apprehension. Part of it's a hope system in some sense. Right? It's the elicitation of hope.
That's right. You know, it's dopamine, and here I'm robbing words from others, like my colleague Anna Lemke, who, you know, it's not about having, it's about wanting. It's not about pleasure as much as it is about craving and motivation and drive. And something critical about
And Panksepp called it seeking.
Yeah, brilliant. I never met Panksepp. Did you? You met Yak?
I met him online. We were in a neurological chat room, so to speak, for a neuropsychological chat room for about 5 years, and I had a chance to interact with him a fair bit in that. So that was really good.
I'm envious. He's done beautiful work, and thank you for calling people's attention to his work. I know you've done that many times, and such key work. The dopamine system is in touch with the autonomic system, sure, because it has to register success versus failure of some pursuit. The prefrontal cortex is actually part of the dopamine reward system. People often overlook this, and then we just think about nucleus accumbens and ventral tegmental area. But the prefrontal cortex, because as you pointed out before, it is generating possible outcomes, different rules, different selves are being projected into the future. You can think the two marshmallow task, the classic, give kids the option to either have a marshmallow now or wait and have two marshmallows, and the cute little videos of the kids, in the room with the marshmallows, sniffing it, talking to it. Occasionally a kid will just stuff it in his mouth. Another child will turn away, delightful, right? And all sorts of ideas have come about how they do in life versus if they can wait or not wait. In any case, that's dopaminergic anticipation. The key thing with dopamine, I think, that encapsulates the most of it is this notion of reward prediction error, which is very simple. If you are excited and anticipating something, you are generating some internal sense of the probability of it happening. We're going to the ice cream store, kids. Let's go. We're going to have ice cream. We have ice cream. It's closed. The disappointment that they experience actually brings them far lower than they would feel, much more sad than they would feel than had you not told them you were going to get ice cream, which speaks exactly to what you were saying, that it's an anticipation signal. So dopamine's going up, 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 we're going to get ice cream, and then no. So it drops below baseline. They would have been better off being not told they were going to the ice cream store. Just drive right by it.
The danger of hope.
The danger of hope. If you anticipate that it's going to be open, and again, this could translate to any scenario, and it's open, there's a dopaminergic signal upon receiving the reward, but it then drops a little bit. This is the basis of addiction, actually. Drops a little bit below baseline transiently. So we always think of the ice cream is the reward. Well, actually, the reward was right before you had that first lick of ice cream because you know you're going to get it. This is also true of sexual behavior. It's true of people who sell a company or they're anticipating something exciting, or of a wedding. It also sort of partially explains this notion of postpartum depression, where people are so excited about something, the delivery of a child or something, on the arrival, and then for some reason they feel let down. It's because the anticipation was that great. So many scenarios.
There might be an exhaustion component there too. Well, it's also the case, if I remember correctly, that dopamine kick. So imagine what it does is backtrack the neural systems that were activated as the reward was approached. So then it feeds back reinforcement, not reward, but mediates cellular growth and maybe myelinization. It's increasing the efficiency of the neural connections of the systems that were activated just prior to receiving that reward in the order they were prioritized.
That's right.
In the order they were manifested. So the closer the behavior is to the receipt of the reward, the more it's reinforced and more likely to be manifested in the future. And then there's a decay function going back in time. And that's partly how an addictive subpersonality can grow too, right? Because you can imagine that there's a certain state of mind that you're in. Maybe it's a state of something approximating nihilistic hopelessness that grips you every time you're motivated to seek out your favorite drug. And that's fairly far back in the activation chain, but it's there every time you take a hit. So what happens is the dopaminergic reinforcement produced by the drug reinforces that nihilistic hopelessness that drives the drug-seeking behavior.
That's right.
And that's how, in part, you develop a monkey on your back.
Yeah, I love the example, even though I'm sad that it happens for people. I love the example because what you're saying is that, and it's exactly right, that the memory for events and states of mind and emotions that preceded a successful collection of reward or arrival at reward is set into a huge number of motor commands, some of which are subconscious. And the ultimate dopamine signal, actually I experienced this the other day. I can give an example. My girlfriend and I decided to go to the beach. We were going to go do this little ritual that we've been talking about doing for a while. And I had on a piece of paper what we had written out we were going to do. And I had it in my back pocket. And we got to the ocean and the sun was setting. It was sort of perfect timing for this. And the piece of paper was gone. And I thought, oh my goodness, how did I screw this up? Like, of all the things, I'm supposed to, I'm 47 years old. This is not like I should be able to do this, Get
your
I
act
blew it.
Yeah,
I blew it. So I went back to the car, long walk, looking everywhere. It was not a windy day, but I thought, gosh, where's this piece of paper? Looking around, didn't find it. Went all the way back to the car. Was in the car, came all the way back, and I was walking toward her. I saw her, and I thought, okay, this is really embarrassing. I'm gonna just have to wing it or remember. We didn't have our phones intentionally either, so we couldn't look it up. And then I saw the piece of paper on the beach, and it was partially buried in the sand. I picked it up, and I was elated. What happened there was my dopamine had dropped way below baseline because I was disappointed that I'd lost it, disappointed in myself, et cetera. And then I found it.
So your anticipation was for nothing.
Exactly.
So you got punished by yourself for that.
Exactly.
Because that should be eradicated. If you're highly anticipatory and it doesn't make itself manifest, then you were seriously wrong. So you're going to take an emotional hit as a consequence of that. I think that's also associated, that emotional hit, that pain that you feel, I think that's actually associated with the beginning stages of the death of the systems that mediated that initial response. Because you should eradicate systems that make you anticipate that don't work, right? And that means those systems, which are already instantiated and alive in some sense, have to decay and die. And it strikes me as highly probable that you're going to pay a price in something approximating pain for the death of those malfunctioning systems. It's also why, because why wouldn't they fight for their lives to some degree? Why wouldn't they resist the decay and death that might be necessary to keep you going? Why, there should be some pain associated with that logically, because it is a biological transformation.
Yeah, it's an interesting lens to view it through. That self image that I had in that moment of, I'm the responsible partner who can take care of a simple thing, right? For this nice little ritual that we'd been talking about doing for a while. I failed, right? So that part.
Well, it's also so interesting. You think about that. This is a depressive cascade, and it's very hard to bind, because imagine you anticipate something and then you make a mistake. Now the question then becomes, how significant is the mistake? And one view of your error would be, well, the paper blew out of my pocket and that could happen to anybody. And the more catastrophic interpretation would be, and it's an extension of the thought path that you started to walk down, well, I'm near 50 years old, I should be much more responsible than this, and there's something wrong with me as a person. And then a depressive person would go even further. They'd say, well, not only is there something wrong with me in this decision, this is a decision like every other decision I make right now. I never make a good decision. In the past, I've never made a good decision, and there's no way I'm going to change in the future. And so the depressive takes that punishment response, let's say, that's a consequence of failed anticipation, and can't bind it. It just takes out all of their potential future selves. That's a good way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
And so then they're in a depressive pit.
Yeah,
so that's too much learning from failure.
Right. I'm really I'm grateful for your insight on this, because indeed, if I'm honest, my thought train went to the point of, I didn't think, I'm a total failure because I lost this piece of paper. I thought to myself, well, if it were a priority, I would have ensured I wouldn't have lost it.
Right.
She'll interpret it as not being a priority. Like, where are my priorities? Am I overspent? Like what's going on? You start to sift into the full set of questions. And then, of course, finding the paper resurrects the sense of self. It was, I think it was in that movie, Pulp Fiction.
Yeah, well, that binding problem is really tricky, because so there's some good rules of thumb for that, which is one of the rules of thumb for that's extremely useful, that's socially instantiated, is innocent until proven guilty. Right, so you might say when those thoughts come up, because they're adversarial and accusatory thoughts, you might say, well, that is part of the realm of possibility, but I shouldn't. When your child does something wrong that's minor, you don't say you're a rotten kid, right? You bind it. You say, look, kid, here's a bunch of things you're doing right. But in this particular example, specific situation, here's the minimal thing you did incorrectly and how to alter it. And it's a really good habit of mind. It's like to address towards yourself as well as to other people, which is to say, well, what's the minimum crime that I'm responsible for in this moment? And that's part of this miracle of the presumption of innocence, and especially without proof. A lot of what I did in my clinical practice to people who had a depressive temperament was help them make a case for themselves. It's like, well, maybe you're as bad as you think you might be, but maybe not. Let's take the contrary argument. Let's make you as innocent as you can be in this situation, and only narrow the repair to the absolute minimum that needs to be manifested.